The airport terminal buzzed with rolling suitcases, boarding calls, and expensive perfume drifting through the polished halls. Vanessa Carter walked ahead confidently in high heels, her designer handbag swinging from her arm as though the entire terminal belonged to her. Every few seconds, she checked her reflection in her phone camera before taking another photo for social media. Behind her walked her older sister, Elena Carter, dressed in a simple navy blazer and comfortable shoes. Her silver, streaked hair was tied neatly back, and despite the calm expression on her face, years of discipline showed in every step she took. "You could have at least worn something nicer," Vanessa muttered while glancing back. "We're flying to a charity gala, not attending a grocery sale." Elena smiled faintly. "Comfort matters more on long flights." Vanessa rolled her eyes dramatically. "That's exactly why nobody takes you seriously anymore." The words stung more than Elena admitted. Still, she stayed silent. She had spent most of her life enduring comments like these from her younger sister. Ever since retirement, Elena had avoided talking about her military career. She preferred peace over attention. Vanessa, however, loved attention more than anything. As they approached the airline counter, Vanessa leaned casually against the desk and flashed a polished smile at the employee. "2 Carter reservations," she said sweetly. The attendant typed quickly before frowning slightly. "It appears there's been a seating adjustment." Vanessa glanced sideways at Elena, hiding a smirk. "Oh yes," she interrupted quickly. "I requested it earlier." The attendant handed over the boarding passes. Vanessa took the first one immediately. Perfect, first class. Then she handed the second pass to Elena without even looking at her. "Economy suits you better anyway." For a brief second, Elena stared at the ticket in silence. "Row 38? Middle seat." Around them, several travelers overheard the comment. A young couple nearby exchanged uncomfortable looks. An older man shook his head quietly. Vanessa noticed the reactions and laughed softly. "What? Don't look at me like that. Some people are perfectly happy in economy." Elena could have corrected her. She could have demanded her original business class seat back. Instead, she simply folded the boarding pass neatly and slipped it into her pocket. "If that's what you wanted," she said calmly. Vanessa blinked, almost disappointed that Elena hadn't argued. "Finally learning your place," she replied. The words cut deeper than Vanessa realized. Years ago, after their parents died, Elena had practically raised her sister alone. While serving in the Air Force, she sent most of her paycheck home for Vanessa's tuition, rent, and expensive hobbies. Elena missed birthdays, holidays, and relationships while stationed overseas in dangerous regions. Vanessa never saw those sacrifices. Or maybe she never cared to. Hours later, Elena settled quietly into her economy seat between a nervous college student and an elderly woman clutching a worn photograph of a soldier. "You military?" the older woman asked gently after noticing Elena's posture. Elena smiled politely. "Retired. My husband served," the woman whispered proudly, showing the photo. 42 years ago. Elena listened kindly as the woman shared stories about love, loss, and loneliness. Across the aisle, a young recruit heading to basic training admitted he was terrified. "What if I fail?" he asked nervously. "You won't," Elena answered calmly. "Fear doesn't make weak soldiers. Quitting does." The young man straightened slightly after hearing her words. Meanwhile, several rows ahead in first class, Vanessa uploaded another glamorous selfie captioned, "Some people belong in luxury, others belong where they started." She smiled at the flood of likes appearing instantly. Then the cabin suddenly grew quiet. A flight attendant hurried down the aisle beside economy class, whispering urgently to another crew member. Moments later, the cockpit door opened. The pilot himself stepped into the cabin. Passengers looked up curiously as he walked past first class without stopping. His eyes scanned the rows carefully until they landed on Elena. Then, to everyone's shock, the pilot stood perfectly straight. The veteran captain placed his hand respectfully over his chest. "General Carter," he said clearly, his voice filled with admiration, "it is an honor to have you on board, ma'am." The entire economy section fell silent. Vanessa's smile disappeared instantly from the front cabin as dozens of confused passengers turned toward Elena in disbelief. And for the first time that day, Vanessa looked afraid. Silence swept through the aircraft after the pilot's words. Passengers stared at Elena with widened eyes while whispers spread row by row across the cabin. Did he say general? She was in the military. Oh my God. Elena looked almost uncomfortable with the attention. She stood politely and shook the pilot's hand. There's no need for ceremony, Captain, she said gently. Please take care of your passengers. The pilot smiled with deep respect. You spent your life taking care of others, ma'am. Allow us this small courtesy. Several flight attendants suddenly gathered nearby, offering Elena complimentary meals and asking whether she wished to move to first class immediately. Vanessa watched the scene from the front cabin, her face draining of color. Move to first class, the same seat she had mocked her sister for losing only an hour earlier. To Vanessa's frustration, Elena declined politely. I'm perfectly comfortable here, she replied. That answer somehow embarrassed Vanessa even more. The passengers around Elena began treating her differently after that. The nervous recruit sitting beside her looked at her with amazement. You're really a general? He whispered. Retired? Elena answered softly, but still, she smiled faintly. Rank matters less than character. The young man nodded as though memorizing every word. Up front, Vanessa tried pretending nothing had happened. She adjusted her sunglasses and scrolled through social media, but she could feel people glancing toward her. One businessman seated nearby finally spoke. That woman back there is your sister, correct? Vanessa forced a smile. Unfortunately, the man frowned slightly. You must be proud. Vanessa gave a careless shrug. She likes the military stuff. It's her entire personality. The businessman looked unimpressed and returned to his newspaper. For the first time in years, Vanessa felt judged instead of admired. As the flight continued, Elena quietly returned to comforting the passengers around her. The elderly widow beside her shared stories about losing her husband shortly after war deployment decades earlier. He wrote me letters every week, the woman said emotionally, said brave people aren't fearless, they just keep going. Elena's eyes softened. He was right, the widow smiled warmly. You remind me of him. Those simple words affected Elena more deeply than medals ever had. Hours later, turbulence suddenly shook the plane violently. Several passengers gasped as overhead bins rattled. Drinks spilled across tray tables while the aircraft dipped sharply through heavy clouds. A child began crying loudly nearby. The flight attendants worked quickly, but panic spread fast through economy class. Elena immediately stood, steady despite the shaking aircraft. Everyone stay seated, she said calmly, her voice naturally commanding attention. Fasten your seatbelts tightly. Breathe slowly. Something about her tone settled the cabin instantly. Even frightened passengers obeyed without hesitation. Then another problem erupted. An elderly man near the rear rows clutched his chest painfully as his wife screamed for help. Two flight attendants rushed toward him, visibly nervous. Elena moved without thinking. Years of leadership took over automatically. Knees elevated, she instructed calmly while checking the man's pulse. Has he taken heart medication today? The frightened wife nodded tearfully. Elena coordinated with the crew smoothly until the man's breathing slowly stabilized. The surrounding passengers watched her with admiration. One attendant whispered to another, no wonder the captain recognized her. Meanwhile, Vanessa sat frozen in first class. For years, she had convinced herself Elena was boring, outdated, and irrelevant. Yet everywhere her sister went, people listened. Trusted, respected, not because of money, not because of beauty, because of who she was. That realization irritated Vanessa more than she wanted to admit. Unable to stop herself, she quietly opened her phone and searched Elena's full name online. The results appeared instantly. Photos of military ceremonies, news interviews, medals pinned proudly onto Elena's uniform by government officials. Headlines describing rescue missions overseas. One article caught Vanessa's attention immediately. General Elena Carter risks career to save trapped soldiers during flood evacuation. Vanessa stared at the screen silently. Another article mentioned scholarships Elena secretly funded for military families. Another described humanitarian missions after natural disasters. Vanessa's chest tightened strangely. All these years she had never once bothered asking about her sister's life, not really. A sudden memory surfaced painfully in her mind. 16-year-old Vanessa demanding an expensive prom dress while Elena quietly mailed money home from an overseas deployment. Vanessa had complained the amount wasn't enough. She slowly lowered the phone. For the first time in years, shame began creeping into her heart. And somewhere deep inside, she realized the painful truth. The woman she spent years mocking was the strongest person she had ever known. By the time the plane landed in Geneva, whispers about General Elena Carter had spread through nearly every row on board. Passengers who once ignored her now stepped aside respectfully as she exited the aircraft. Vanessa followed behind silently, gripping her designer purse tighter than usual. The moment they entered the terminal, several uniformed airport officials approached Elena immediately. Behind them stood 2 military officers waiting near the arrival gate. Both officers straightened the instant they saw her. "General Carter," one greeted warmly, "Welcome back, ma'am." Elena shook their hands politely. "Please, it's just Elena now." Vanessa stood awkwardly a few feet away, suddenly feeling invisible. Usually, airports were her stage. People noticed her beauty, her expensive clothing, her confidence. But today nobody cared about any of that. Every eye remained fixed on Elena instead. One officer turned toward Vanessa politely. "You must be General Carter's sister." Before Vanessa could answer proudly, Elena spoke calmly. "Yes, Vanessa traveled with me." There was no bitterness in her voice. No humiliation. No attempt to expose what happened on the plane. That somehow made Vanessa feel worse. As they rode toward the hotel in a black sedan provided by the event organizers, silence filled the car. Vanessa finally cleared her throat. "You could have told people who you were," she muttered while staring out the window. Elena looked at her quietly. "You never asked." The simple answer hit harder than anger would have. That evening, the grand charity gala overflowed with diplomats, wealthy donors, military veterans, and international journalists. Crystal chandeliers glowed across the ballroom, while orchestras played softly in the background. Vanessa immediately slipped into social mode, greeting rich guests with practiced charm. She laughed loudly, posed for photographs, and tried regaining the confidence she had lost during the flight. Meanwhile, Elena remained near the edges of the ballroom, speaking quietly with veterans and aid workers. Yet somehow people naturally gathered around her anyway. Vanessa noticed it constantly. A decorated officer introducing his family proudly. An elderly woman hugging Elena with tears in her eyes. A young nurse thanking her for funding medical evacuation programs overseas. Vanessa's irritation slowly turned into insecurity. Then the ballroom lights dimmed. The host stepped onto the stage, smiling warmly. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "tonight we honor a woman whose leadership saved lives both on and off the battlefield." Vanessa froze. The massive screen behind the stage lit up with photographs of Elena in uniform, leading rescue teams, comforting injured soldiers, carrying children through floodwaters. Gasps filled the room. The host continued proudly, "A war hero, a humanitarian, and one of the most respected commanders of her generation. Please welcome General Elena Carter." The ballroom erupted into applause. People rose to their feet instantly. Vanessa remained seated for 2 stunned seconds before awkwardly standing with everyone else. Elena looked genuinely uncomfortable by the attention as she walked toward the stage. She accepted the award quietly before stepping to the microphone. Vanessa expected her sister to finally expose everything. She expected revenge. Instead, Elena spoke softly. "Titles fade," she began, "medals collect dust, but the way we treat people, that becomes our true legacy." The room fell completely silent. "I've commanded soldiers during war," Elena continued, "and I've learned something important. Strength is not measured by power, money, or status. It's measured by kindness when kindness is difficult." Vanessa lowered her eyes slowly. "There will always be moments when people underestimate you," Elena said gently. "Sometimes strangers, sometimes even family, But bitterness only creates more pain. Grace is harder. Forgiveness is harder. Yet those choices define who we become. Every word felt aimed directly at Vanessa without Elena mentioning her name once. That hurt far more than public humiliation ever could. When the speech ended, the audience applauded even louder than before. Vanessa suddenly felt painfully small. Later that night, she stood alone near the balcony while guests continued praising Elena nearby. One veteran spoke emotionally to another. She personally wrote letters to every family after the evacuation mission, he said, even attended funerals herself. Another nodded. That's why people respect her, not because she was a general, because she never acted above anyone. Vanessa swallowed hard. For years, she believed respect came from appearing important, but watching Elena tonight revealed the truth. Real respect could not be bought, demanded, or faked. It had to be earned. And for the first time in her life, Vanessa realized she had earned almost none of it. The hotel balcony overlooked the glowing city skyline, but Vanessa barely noticed the beautiful view. Inside the ballroom, music still played softly while guests laughed and celebrated. Yet Vanessa remained alone near the cold railing, replaying Elena's speech repeatedly inside her mind. Grace is harder. Forgiveness is harder. Those words refused to leave her. For years, Vanessa believed confidence meant dominating every room, wearing the finest clothes, and making sure people envied her. But tonight, she had watched her sister command an entire ballroom without arrogance, cruelty, or pride. And somehow, that quiet strength shattered Vanessa more than humiliation ever could. She heard footsteps behind her. Elena stepped onto the balcony, holding 2 untouched cups of coffee. Without speaking, she handed one to Vanessa. Vanessa accepted it slowly. You should hate me, she whispered after several seconds. Elena leaned lightly against the railing. Sometimes I tried to. The honesty in her voice hurt. Vanessa stared down at her cup. Why didn't you embarrass me back there after everything? Elena gave a tired smile. Because I know what humiliation feels like. That answer broke something inside Vanessa. Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. All these years, she said shakily, I thought you looked down on me. You were always disciplined, respected, perfect, and I felt like the selfish younger sister nobody admired. Elena looked surprised. Vanessa, I never wanted admiration from you. Then what did you want? Her sister's expression softened painfully. Just love, Elena answered quietly, and maybe a little respect. Vanessa covered her mouth as guilt crashed over her fully for the first time. Memories flooded her mind one after another. Elena missing Christmas because she was deployed overseas. Money arriving exactly when Vanessa needed tuition. Birthday gifts mailed from military bases across the world. Phone calls Elena made despite exhaustion just to ask whether her little sister was okay. And every time, Vanessa had acted entitled instead of grateful. I was awful to you, Vanessa whispered. Elena did not deny it. For a long moment, neither sister spoke. Finally, Elena sighed softly. The plane incident hurt more than you realize. Vanessa's tears spilled completely now. I know, no, Elena replied gently. I don't think you did. The honesty in those words carried years of buried pain. Vanessa lowered her head in shame. The next morning, Elena expected Vanessa to avoid her out of embarrassment. Instead, her younger sister appeared downstairs dressed simply for once, without designer jewelry or dramatic makeup. I signed up this morning, Vanessa said nervously, handing Elena a paper. Elena examined it carefully. It was a volunteer registration form for the Veterans Support Center connected to the charity event. You don't have to do this, Elena said quietly. Yes, Vanessa replied firmly, I do. Over the following days, Elena watched her sister interact with injured veterans, grieving families, and struggling military spouses. At first, Vanessa seemed awkward and uncomfortable, but slowly something changed. She began listening instead of talking, learning instead of showing off. One elderly veteran told Vanessa stories about soldiers Elena had rescued years earlier. Another woman described how Elena secretly paid hospital bills for wounded families. Each story deepened Vanessa's shame, but also her admiration. For the first time in years, she saw her sister clearly. not as competition, not as an embarrassment, but as someone extraordinary. A week later, the charity organization held a closing ceremony before guests departed home. To Elena's surprise, Vanessa requested the microphone unexpectedly. The ballroom quieted as Vanessa faced the audience nervously. "I spent many years misunderstanding my sister," she admitted honestly. "I thought strength meant status, wealth, and attention, but I was wrong." Elena looked up in shock. Vanessa's voice trembled emotionally. "The strongest woman I've ever known is General Elena Carter, not because of her rank, but because she kept loving people even when they hurt her." The room erupted into applause. Elena's eyes filled with tears she rarely allowed herself to show. After the ceremony ended, Vanessa approached carefully. "I know forgiveness takes time," she whispered. Elena studied her silently before opening her arms. Vanessa broke down completely as her sister embraced her tightly. Months later, the two women boarded another flight together. This time, Vanessa quietly handed Elena a first-class boarding pass while holding an economy ticket herself. Elena glanced at both tickets before smiling softly. Then she tore them in half. Vanessa blinked in confusion. "We sit together now," Elena said warmly. And for the first time in many years, the sisters finally did.